We're about to dive into the very bedrock of modern finance. You know, the data that fuels trillion-dollar decisions. But what if that bedrock is correct? What if the foundation we all put our trust in has a deep hidden flaw?
I mean, what if the databases we treat like objective truth are actually riddled with errors and biases, like ghosts in the machine? And what if those numbers aren't just a little bit off, but wrong enough to change everything?
For decades, you've had these giants, right? Databases like CSRP, which tracks historical stock prices, and Compustat from S&P, which covers company financials. They've been the absolute gold standard. They're the essential tools for anyone trying to make sense of the market.
I mean, think about it. Thousands of research papers get published every single year using data from these sources. They really are, without a doubt, the pillars of our financial knowledge.
We're talking about half a century of trust here. A whole ecosystem has been built on this one simple assumption, that the data is clean, it's comprehensive, and it's correct. And that's not some small assumption, right? It's the basis for how we value companies, how we test economic theories, and how we make huge policy decisions.
But here's what researchers have been finding out. It's not just one crack. The foundation is, well, it's full of them. So let's take a look at what's really going on behind the numbers.
So the first huge problem isn't about numbers that are wrong. It's about the numbers that are missing completely. These are the ghosts in the machine, the data that just vanishes, creating these silent biases that totally warp how we see reality.
Now, the most famous ghost of them all is survivorship bias. It's actually really simple. If you only study the companies that made it, the ones that survived, you're going to get a very rosy and totally wrong picture of how easy it is to succeed. The failures, the ones that could teach us the most, they're just invisible.
And this bias is sneaky. It pops up in all sorts of ways. You've got delisting bias, where a failing company's final awful returns just disappear from the record. Then there's backfill bias. This one's a classic. Imagine a new fund, right? It hides its early, maybe not so great performance. Once it finally gets a good track record, it backfills its history into the database, making it look like a genius from day one. It's literally like only showing your parents your report card after you get an A.
So, okay, how big of a problem is this in the real world?
Well, let's take that delisting bias. A study found that in CRSP, and remember, this is a top-tier database, a staggering 13% of companies that were delisted, often because they went bust, were just missing their final performance data. That is a huge chunk of failure just wiped clean from the record, making the market look a whole lot healthier than it actually was.
And sometimes it's not even a subtle bias. Sometimes the data's just gone. Researchers looking at credit line data in S&P's Capital IQ found that when they manually checked company filings, about 80% of firms had a credit line. But in the database, it only had data for about 19%. The rest were just empty fields.
Okay, so we've got missing data. But what about the data that is there? Well, that brings us to the second massive problem, the standardization trap. This is what happens when databases, trying to be helpful and make data easy to compare, actually end up changing it.
So, here's an example. A company reports a number for its cost of goods sold in its official SEC filing. But when you go look it up in a database like Compustat, you might see a totally different number. Why? Well, the database standardizes it to fit its own definitions, and in the process creates a number the company never actually reported.
And the scale of this problem, it's just stunning. One study looked at 26 major manufacturing companies. They compared the cost of goods sold from the database to the official filings, and get this, only one of them matched. Just one.
But this next one is maybe the most shocking of all. The data isn't even stable. Researchers actually documented this rewriting history thing happening in the IBES database, which tracks analyst recommendations. They downloaded data, then went back a few years later to download the exact same historical data, and found that tens of thousands of records had been changed, added, or just deleted without any warning. History was literally being rewritten.
So, the billion-dollar question, why does any of this matter? I mean, these might sound like tiny academic details, but the consequences are massive. They affect research, investments, and business strategy.
First, these errors can completely distort research results. A finding that seems true could be nothing more than an illusion created by bad data. Second, they can completely destroy an entire research project. I mean, can you imagine spending months, even years, on a study, only to find out the data you built it on was fundamentally flawed?
And finally, and this is probably the most important one, they can damage management decisions.
Businesses using this data to check out competitors or analyze markets could be basing multi-million-dollar strategies on pure fantasy.
And this isn't just a theory. Way back in 1986, researchers showed that these biases are big enough to completely flip the outcome of a study. A hypothesis that looks true with database data could be proven totally false with clean data, or the other way around.
So what are we supposed to do? The answer is not to throw these powerful tools out the window. It's to become smarter, more critical consumers of data. The key takeaway here is simple. You've got to question everything.
So here's your practical guide. Number 1, be skeptical. Just assume there are errors. 2, cross-reference. If the stakes are high, always go back to the original source, like a company's SEC filing. 3, clean your data. Actively look for the biases we've been talking about. And finally, number 4, read the footnotes. Know exactly how the database defines its terms before you even think about drawing a conclusion. Ultimately, it all comes down to this. We have to stop treating data like it's infallible truth. It's a tool. And like any tool, how well it works depends on the skill of the person using it. The most valuable skill in this age of big data isn't coding, it's critical thinking.
And that leaves us with one last, really urgent question. If these foundational, human-curated databases have this many flaws, what happens when we start building automated AI and trading algorithms on top of them? In a world that's increasingly run by automated systems, who is responsible for checking the data?